Please be patient. Good evening, everyone. We're just waiting for our guests to arrive. Thank you.
Hello again, everyone. And I'm going to start with the most popular question of this year, 2020. Am I audible?
So people are on mute.
Yes, but I can see them nodding, so which means I'm audible. While we wait for Chitraji to join, we do have to understand that she's joining us from the USA. Oh, she's here actually. Just as we started the conversation, she's arrived. So we must factor in the time difference. It's early morning in the USA where she is. Great. So I'm going to start with a formal introduction that I had prepared for this evening. It gives me immense pleasure to invite today the celebrated author, Chitra Divakaruni. We are delighted to have you amidst us. I would also like to welcome the esteemed members of the FLO governing body who have joined us for this event. A special welcome to the Lucknow chapter chairperson, Pooja Garg. And I have to add here that we cannot thank her enough for giving us this opportunity to interact with Chitraji today. A warm welcome to the FLO Lucknow Executive Committee, our esteemed members from across the country, and all the guests who have taken out time to join us for this very special session. I would now like to invite the FLO Lucknow Chapter Chair, Pooja Garg, to introduce our guest speaker, Chitra Divakaruni. Over to you, Pooja.
Thank you, Devanshi. A very good morning to our guest speaker, Mrs. Chitra Divakaruni, who is joining us all the way from Houston at 7:30 in the morning. And a very good evening to the past presidents, governing body members, my fellow FLO family, guests, and all those watching us live on Facebook. Oscar Wilde said, "What seems to us as trials are often blessings in disguise." I cannot but wholeheartedly agree with this quote, as COVID, with all its devastation, brought to our chapter the opportunity to bring several exceptional speakers to Lucknow, which would otherwise be unlikely. A case in point being Chitraji, who is speaking to us from across thousands of miles in such troubled times. I must tell you here, when I was planning my year as the chairperson of FLO Lucknow chapter, the one name who topped my list of the people I really wanted my members to hear from was that of Chitra Banerjee. She holds a special place in my heart, and I'm elated to have her amongst us today. I've always believed that books are the greatest tools of shaping the long-term collective consciousness of society and of nuanced education. And who better to reintroduce us to our own great books, our epics, by making them more relatable and relevant than the legendary author Chitraji. She needs no introduction to the readers among us who have enjoyed her numerous books. And even the non-readers have encountered her work, as two of her books have been made into movies. Chitraji is an award-winning and best-selling author, poet, activist, and teacher of writing. Her works are largely set in India and the United States and offers focus on the experiences of South Asian immigrants. Her work has been published in over 50 magazines, and her writing has been included in over 50 anthologies, including the Best American Short Stories, the O. Henry Prize Stories, and the Pushcart Prize Anthology. Her book of short stories, Arranged Marriage, won an American Book Award. In 2015, she was chosen by the Economic Times for their list 20 most influential global Indian women. Two of her books, The Mistress of Spices and The Sister of My Heart, were adapted into movies. Several of her novels have been optioned to made into movies or TV serials. She's the founder and former president of Maitri, a helpline founded in 1991 for South Asian women dealing in domestic abuse. She now serves on its advisory board and on the board of similar organizations in Houston. Now, on behalf of FLO Lucknow, I would like to present her with the Green Certificate as a token of our appreciation. IT team, I request you to please display the certificate on the screen.
At FLO believe in sustainable living. And so we plant a tree in your name in association with Trees for Tribals. You can track your tree on growtrees.com with the unique identification number given on the green certificate. This is our small contribution to a cleaner and greener tomorrow.
Let me now introduce our moderator for the day, Mrs. Devanshi Seth, who among her many feats is a voracious reader. Devanshi Seth was a journalist with the Times of India for 13 years. She quit her job as editor of social pages for the state and launched her new venture in 2017, Now Lucknow, an online portal telling stories about Lucknow and in a small way helping our city reach its true potential. I now request Devanshi to please take this conversation forward.
Thank you so much, Pooja, for that introduction. And thank you for giving me this opportunity. Before I start, I have to confess that I'm having a fan moment here, Chitraji. So you must forgive any mistake that I make while interviewing you. You know, I might have a case of the nerves today. You never know. But without much ado, we have so many people who've read your books here and who are waiting to hear from you. So without much ado, I would like to go straight on into our interview, if that's okay with you, Chitraji.
Yes, of course. Thank you so much to FLO Lucknow for inviting me. It is a great pleasure and a great honor to be here with you folks and all the wonderful people online. And thanks to all of you for reading my books.
Wonderful, Chitraji. So let's start from the very beginning. You started writing after you shifted to the US to share your experiences as an Indian immigrant woman. Share a little more about the challenges you faced when you moved countries and what triggered the writer in you.
Great question. I moved to the US a long time back. I was not even 20 years old at that time. I moved to go to for higher studies. But what I did not realize is I was going to be leaving a whole world behind and so many people that were so dear to my heart, both friends and family. And at that time when I got to the US, you know, things were not easy. There was no internet. Phone connections were very expensive. So pretty much I was cut off from my dear ones and from my culture. It was not possible to just get on the internet and watch Indian movies, see Indian news, any of that. I had to wait for letters for like half a month. It took a long time for letters. If you remember, some of you, those aerograms that we used to send back and forth, I used to wait very eagerly for letters from home. So anyway, I found myself then in a whole other world. It was very exciting, but I was also homesick. And I think what it made me do is it made me see my culture in a whole other way. When I was living in Kolkata before I moved, I was just immersed in my culture. I never thought about it. I never thought about the world of India and what it meant. When I ended up in the Midwest in Ohio, it was so different. There were hardly any Indians around. And it really made me at once miss my culture, appreciate my culture, but also see things about my culture that I hadn't seen before, including how women were treated both positively and negatively in Indian culture. And it also made me very aware of the plight of the immigrant who is cut off from their home culture, who does not necessarily have a community around them, and who is struggling to reestablish an identity for themselves. So all of these things made me want to write. At the same time, my grandfather in India passed away. I was very close to my grandfather. So when he passed away, I couldn't even go back to India. It was the middle of a semester. I did not have any money to make that long journey. And I was quite devastated. And I thought that to honor him, I would start writing. And I had never written before. So that was my first piece of writing, was a poem about my grandfather. So I think a combination of family uh, and missing family and personal events and also the larger events around me made me want to write. And when I saw what the immigrant was going through, both positive and negative, I really want to capture that experience, the experience of excitement of being in a new world, but also of having given up so much. And so that became the stories in Arranged Marriage, which went on to win an American Book Award. And I was just, delighted, but also very surprised at winning that award. But it gave me a lot of confidence, and it made me go on to writing books like The Mistress of Spices and Sister of My Heart.
Wonderful. I think the difficulties do bring out the best in us, as was the case with you, when you moved to the US. Before we talk about your writing, Chitraji, there's something that I want to ask you. Do you feel the immigration experience is less traumatic now, considering that there is greater connectivity and more awareness about cultures across the world?
Definitely, definitely. Things have become a lot different. Things have become a lot better. I see new immigrants, including family members, young family members who come here. They are completely connected thanks to the internet and thanks to WhatsApp and other devices, other programs like that. I have a niece who's come here. Her mother is still in India, but she talks to her mother every day on WhatsApp. When she cooks something, and she didn't know how to cook much when she came here, her mother would be on WhatsApp with her, telling her every step of the recipe. And we just did not, our generation just did not have that. Now news is available so easily. All the major newspapers have portals. News is just easily available, many sources. We have to be careful. Now there's so much, we have to be careful what we choose, but it's certainly much more, it's just so much more accessible. And I love that myself. I can keep much more in touch with India and people in India because of the internet. So I'm very thankful for that.
Wonderful. Chitraji, tell us your decision to write about women characters. When you shifted to the US, you started writing. Writing came because you wanted to express those emotions that you could not share probably at that time with your family, and you felt that there was so much bottled up inside of you. But the decision to write about women characters, was that something that you decided to do consciously? You decided that, my family voices needed to be heard, the women in my family, their voices need to be heard? Or was it something that came naturally to you, that you just picked up the pen and paper or a typewriter, whatever it was at that time, and you started writing, and the stories that flowed from you were about women?
I think it was a conscious decision because around that same time, even when I was on campus as a student, I started volunteering in the Women's Center. I was at the University of California in Berkeley, and I started volunteering for the Women's Center, and then after graduation for an organization in the community. And then soon after that, we started, and especially I started working with domestic violence, and soon after that with trafficking. So women who were being trafficked, who were, they were just going through a lot of different abuse. They had had to leave their homes for many reasons. And I started volunteering at a shelter. And then soon after that, a group of South Asian women and myself, we got together and we founded Maitri, which is an organization that helps women like that, and going very strong right now in California. I keep in touch with them. I'm on their advisory board. And that became a great passion of mine, to help women who really were so far from home and did not have, whatever they had, what should I say, counted on, the family support that they had counted on and come halfway across the world for, was suddenly gone from them. So that became a big part of my life. And I started thinking, I want to write women's stories, not only the stories of women who are going through these things, but stories about other women who are strong, who will give perhaps some inspiration to my readers. So based on all of those things and just a lot of emotion, I started writing. So there are, I think the stories in Arranged Marriage are all about women who find themselves in different kinds of challenging situations and how they deal with it. Each one will deal in a different way, and sometimes their external situation will improve and sometimes it will not. But internally, they all grow through grappling with their challenges. So that became an important theme in my life soon after I started becoming a writer. And I think that has continued. I'm passionate about writing about women, their situations, be it going back thousands of years to Draupadi and Sita, or be it writing about women right now, like in my novel Before We Visit the Goddess or Oleander Girl. Those are all dealing with pretty current situations.
Absolutely. So while we're talking about the work in the field of activism that you're doing, I'd like to ask you, uh, are there any real life characters who have made their way into your books? I mean, it is one thing to be inspired by a real life story and write about it, but it's another thing to actually have a real life person making their way into a book, you know. Did that happen with you?
No, I am very careful not to use real life people in my books because,
Right.
first of all, working with women who are in such situations, we preserve a lot of confidentiality. We sign confidentiality contracts, and even without contracts, I would be very respectful of their lives. I would never, exploit their life per se in my story. So I would always take similar situations, but I would always make sure that it's fictional. And there's another important thing about fiction. Once I create a character, I have so much more freedom with that character. And that's important in shaping a story. Even stories of like Draupadi and Sita, I have reimagined them. I have certainly taken the core of the story and the core of their characters from the original texts. But imagination is always a very important thing for me. Without imagination, the story seems, it can't fly. It stays too close to the ground, as it were. It's tied down. So I have to be able to use imagination and then let the story take wing.
Absolutely. Um, so when you started writing, were you writing for yourself, or were you writing to be published?
I think in the beginning I was writing for myself because I had not written before. I had never published anything before. I didn't know if I was any good. I really didn't. And in fact, when I started writing, I was quite bad. Some years back, I went back and looked at some of my early work that hadn't been published, that was in notebooks. Oh my goodness, it was really bad. And so I think as I worked really hard at it, I got better. And that's what I want to say to all the writers in the audience, that you do get better with practice. It's important to have some people that you trust to show your work to. So I joined a small writers group in Berkeley at that time, and they were very helpful in pointing out what was bad, what was good, what was coming across to the reader, and what was not. Because, in our heads as writers, everything is very clear, everything is perfectly described. But by the time we get it onto the paper, it's not that way. And now that I teach writing at the University of Houston, where I live, I am very careful to make that, I don't know, clear to my students that what you have up here and what you have on the page, they're different things. And that's why you need some distance, and it's very helpful to have people tell you what is good. So slowly I became better. I listened to the critiques. It was very hard because your writing is so close to you. They're like your little babies, whatever you're writing down. But I listened to the critiques and I changed things. And I think I got a lot better. And then I started getting published.
You know, the reason that I asked you that question though was, did you face any resistance from publishers when you took your women-centric novels to them? Were you ever told that, you know, men are not going to read your books and we're not going to have enough audience or readership for what you're writing? And maybe somebody told you that your writing is very good, but I don't think we'll be able to sell it. Did that ever happen to you in the initial years?
I think in the very beginning, I would get things sent back saying that, and you know, especially in the US, and at that time in the US, there weren't many people writing about India. There was Bharati Mukherjee. She was about the only other one at that time. And people were like, you know, who's going to read it? This is not going to be of interest to the general public. It was not so much because I was a woman, but because I was writing about something that was so outside of the knowledge of the culture, where the culture was focused. But I was very blessed because the first collection, Arranged Marriages, I told you, won an American Book Award, and that was, you know, considered very prestigious. And I think after that, publishers did not say that. I also had a good agent, and she presented my work well to the publishers. So, and then with Mistress of Spices became a big bestseller. Actually, even Arranged Marriage became a big bestseller. So that is my, you know, that gave me a lot of hope. That gave me also an understanding that literature crosses borders and genders. So writing about women does not mean, first of all, if all the women just read our books, there would be enough readers out there, because really, as statistics have shown, women read more than men do. You know, nothing against any men who are over here. I'm sure they are the wonderful exceptions today, if there are men over here with us. But, you know, women form a large part of our readership. So we should not worry that we won't get readers if we are writing about women. However, I really, really believe it's important to read across genders. Women have always done that. We have always read books by men. And think about as we went through college, you know, what did we read? We were giving men to read, and they were wonderful men writers, nothing wrong with them. I learned so much about writing from Tagore. He is just an amazing chronicler of the human experience. So, you know, you learn from all genders, but it is important, I feel, for people to read across genders, especially for men to read women's books. Women have always read books written by men, but men need to read because it just opens up the experience when you read about a woman's life, a woman's character that's portrayed by a woman. We can get at that from the inside in a very deep way. So it's very important. And I don't believe that there should be any problem. Sometimes publishers will say that, but I think, you know, if your book is good enough, you can overcome that.
Great. Thank you for that advice. While talking about, you know, your readership and your audience, I wanted to ask you something. I'm a mother of a son, and you're a mother of two sons, I believe.
Yes.
Do your sons read your books? And what do they think about the women in your books? They are very strong women. What is their opinion of these women?
Yeah, well, you know, I did it, I guess, the right way when they were little enough and they were too little to know any better. I introduced them to my books. So I would often read to them. And in fact, as they were growing up, I started writing for children. And that was one of the reasons I started writing for children, is that they would be reading my books. So, and they were very excited because I would be writing a book and I'd be reading little parts to them as I was writing. I remember I was writing The Conch Bearer at the time when they were quite little. but not too little to understand. And so they were very used to having these books read to them and having women characters, girl characters. At that time, I wrote the book Victory Song, which is about how children were involved in our Indian independence struggle in a wonderful and often unknown way. So they grew up kind of, I think, they didn't have a choice. They grew up kind of imprinted with the fact that we read about men and we read about women, and it's okay to have a strong woman around. I guess, I was kind of a role model for them, and I made decisions. I did all kinds of things. And my husband, Murthy, is very, very supportive. And I think that was a good role model for them to see also, that men and women support each other, and that makes for a stronger family and a stronger society. So
Absolutely.
yes,
And
they continue reading my books.
and I do believe that strong women raise strong children, you know. So I'm sure you've had a very positive influence on your children.
I think it's just as important for us to raise strong girls, but it's equally important for us to raise empathetic young men who don't see women and their success as a threat. They see how it empowers society and how it really makes society flower when both women and men are supported to follow their dreams.
I couldn't agree with you more on this, you know. This is exactly what I also feel. My next question is again about the characters from your books. Not only do you write about women, you write particularly about Indian women. There are so many nuances of Indian culture in your books that a reader of another nationality may not be able to follow. Does that mean that you write for the Indian reader and that you're okay with readers of other nationalities not reading your works?
You know, that's a great question. I think that applies to some books more than others. I do believe that having myself read books from many cultures that I have loved and learned from, that literature is something that crosses borders. If a story is well written, it's written about human beings, and therefore it will appeal to the human heart, no matter where, in which geography or which culture we grow up. So the human part of a story is always applicable. It's always acceptable. It's always understood. The cultural part of the story is not familiar. However, often that is of great interest. I know that when I've read about other cultures, I've been fascinated. Oh, this is what happens. This is a cultural norm. This is, I don't know, a habit. This is how people think in that culture. These are the things people say. It's fascinating. So as long as people approach a book with that open mind, saying, I will discover something, not only about the human existence and how people live their lives, but also I will discover how a culture works. What are the ways in which people think in this culture? How do they behave towards men and women in this culture? There's lots of things. How is marriage looked upon? How is relationships outside of marriage looked upon? It's quite fascinating. So I think from that angle, I have readers from every culture, but I'm very careful always not to ever explain things, because then it just destroys a book. If I would go around explaining why things are a certain way in Indian culture. So I never do that. I trust my reader of other cultures, my readers from other cultures, that they will pick up what they will pick up. And what they don't pick up, they can research. As I said, the internet is at our fingertips right now. And a lot of things, they don't need to understand everything. So, but I really think for my Indian readers, I am very aware of what they will understand. So every once in a while, I will put in things that only an Indian reader will understand. And that, I think, is my special kind of hello or reaching out to my Indian readership, especially in stories like, I think all of my modern works are as popular, or almost as popular in the US. And now that my books have been translated into 23 plus languages. So I have readers in many other countries as well. So the modern books are very popular everywhere. But the two books which were way more popular in India were Palace of Illusions and Forest of Enchantments, because I think my Indian readers just, I don't know, it touched their hearts in a whole other way. The Ramayana and the Mahabharata are such a part of our culture. We have grown up with it. Those stories have a certain resonance for people of Indian origin, and both in India and elsewhere. I'm talking about the whole Indian diaspora. But when you hear a story when you're growing up, it has a separate kind of impact on you, which is why I wanted to write those stories. I remembered them from the time I was little, and my grandfather used to tell me those stories.
But I want to delve a little more into those two books, Chitraji. You know, I mean, we've always heard this at home, and I mean, it's the way that people talk about Draupadi and Sita, that the Mahabharata was fought because of a woman, and that was Draupadi. And they say that Ram and Ravan, they were also fighting because of a woman, which was Sita. Yet, no one ever thought of presenting these epics from the woman's point of view. What made you, compelled you to retell these epics from the woman's point of view? I think, we have so many comments and questions in the chat box already about your point of view on Draupadi's relationships, how you view her, how you've, sketched those characters. I think we need to spend a lot of time talking about these two characters from your books.
Sure. Certainly. Great questions. So I think I was introduced to both of these characters, as I said, through my grandfather, who would just orally tell me these stories. And I think that is such a wonderful part of our culture, that our elders do tell us these stories. The stories are wonderful. They are fascinating. I would listen, I would just sit and listen to him. But as I grew up, I started thinking about the women in those books. I was very fascinated by them. And by this time I was reading, right? I was reading these books, and I was like, oh, there isn't much about these women. They're such interesting characters and so many things happen to them, but we don't know. And I was thinking at first about the Mahabharata more. There's Draupadi, there's Kunti, there's a whole bunch of other women who come up in the Palace of Illusions. We don't ever know what they're thinking. We see what happens to them, but we don't see the complex thinking and the emotions that they're feeling as they're going through this. When we have the Draupadi's Vastraharan, her clothes are taken off in court. What is she thinking? What's going through her? I feel that these are very strong women, but they're kind of pushed over to the side by the original epic writers. So there came a great desire in me to examine these characters more closely, because I felt that they were timeless and we had a lot to learn from them. And also that we had a lot we could relate to in them because they were timeless. And even though what's happening to Draupadi in court is different from what's happening to us in our lives, in essence, we are often fighting similar battles, and we are often being challenged by similar forces. So I wanted to write first Palace of Illusions from Draupadi's point of view, because, especially when I was growing up, people would often kind of snigger about Draupadi, oh yeah, married to 5 men, etc., as though that were a very fun thing. Personally, I think, handling 1 man is quite challenging in itself. But they did not see her strength. They did not see her intelligence. People just seemed to miss those things. So I wanted to tell her story in her own voice. That was a great need. And then from that time, I was thinking about writing the story of Sita, but I really had to get up a lot more courage, and I had to do a lot of research, because Sita is, in some ways, she's so misportrayed in our culture. When I was growing up, elders would bless me and other girls, be like Sita. But what did they mean by that? They meant be very meek, be very mild, just put up with whatever happens to you, just, be devoted to your husband and your family, and just really don't protest against anything. But when I started researching, but I always felt that there's something missing in that picture. There's something missing in that understanding of Sita. And when I started researching for the Ramayana, I realized, no, she is so strong. She goes through so many difficulties, and she puts up with her challenges. She faces her challenges with so much courage and so much dignity that we have something definitely to learn from her. So to me, Sita and Draupadi became the two different faces of resistance, of living as a woman, of interacting in the world with courage and dignity, but in very different ways, where Draupadi went headstrong and headlong at her problems. Sita's was a much more nuanced way of dealing with her situation, but she was very strong. I mean, look how Ravan has to respect her, even though she is in his power, in his palace, in Lanka, no one else to protect her. But by her strength of character, she manages to overcome anything that he would have wanted to do, and he is respectful. I mean, how amazing is that? We are blessed to have these characters that we can refer back to and relate to our situations today. When, when Ram asks for Agni Pariksha in Ayodhya, Sita says, and she knows that if she just says yes, she will be reunited with the family. She loves Ram. She continues to love Ram, and he continues to love her. But she says, I can't do that. That would be wrong. If I do that, then generations of women coming afterwards will always be asked to prove their innocence. And why? Why should they be forced? Why should they be considered guilty until they're proved innocent? It is not right. I will not do it. So she gives up the chance of happiness, but she does it in her own elegant way. No screaming, no shouting, no throwing things. But she is strong. And Draupadi, on the other hand, many of us will relate to her. She's like, no, and she'll fight against people, and she'll go right at her challenges. She's like, I'm not going to give up. I'm not going to let you tell me what you want me to do. I'm going to fight it, and I'm going to quarrel, and I'm going to make sure I get my way. So two wonderful portraits of female resistance, and we can choose whichever applies to us, or at different times we can choose different ones. How wonderful is this culture that has given us these characters.
But that brings me to the question, I mean, you talked about two women from our culture who are so strong in such diverse ways, For you, who is the stronger one of the two, or whose strength appeals more to you, do you have a personal favorite between the two of them as characters? And who is a better role model for young girls today?
I think they are both great role models. I think what I have learned is that there are situations when we need to be like Draupadi, when we really need to stand up and, make our anger felt or make our opinion very clear. And if people are not going to listen, we need to raise our voices. But there are many times that Sita's is the correct way. Sita's is a very gentle way. She will get her way. If you've read The Forest of Enchantments, you know that when she comes into Ayodhya even, she is there in a difficult situation because King Dashrath has, he's got a very complicated, what shall I say, domestic situation going with the wives, and with Kaikeyi being so strong and Kaushalya is feeling ignored, and Sita's like, oh, okay, what shall I do with this situation? Because in Mithila, everything was very simple. But now she has to deal with all these personalities, and she does it intelligently. She does it with good humor. And sometimes, that is what is needed. You bring people together. You have to kind of quietly plot your moves, but you don't fight with people. And Draupadi's is quite a different story. So at different times in my life, I have felt that Draupadi's way is the only way, because otherwise nothing will get changed. But a lot of times, and I think as I mature myself, I am more drawn to Sita. When I was writing Forest of Enchantments, I really was resonating with her. So much courage when everything outside goes wrong, right? Sita is sent to the forest, she's pregnant. What an amazing character. She does not waste time on things she can do nothing about. Yes, she is sad. She bemoans the fact that Ram has done this thing to her, not even giving her a chance, not even talking to her about it. Because as she says in Forest of Enchantments, if she was part of the decision making, she would have probably decided the same thing for the good of the country, for the good of the kingdom, but she would have felt much better because she would have been a part of the decision-making process. But she doesn't waste time. After she gets over the initial sorrow and the initial heartbreak, she's like, what do I need to do now? I have to bring up my children. I'm going to focus on that. And so for the next several years, that is what she focuses on. So she's very aware of what she has, where she has the power to change her life and where she has the power to contribute to the good. And what she doesn't have the power to do, she doesn't think about anymore. So I think that applies to a lot of our situations where we really cannot change one part of the difficult situation that we find ourselves in, but there's always another part where we can make a major difference. Sita teaches me how to focus my energies. Draupadi teaches me how to break through walls. So sometimes one is necessary and sometimes the other. But they also are characters of great love. You know, they're not just resisting, they're loving the people around them as well. So I hope that people will learn that too from these characters. And so that I go back and forth between Draupadi and Sita depending on my situation. They're both inspiring.
You know, both these characters, I think they stay with the readers for the longest time after we've kept the book down. I mean, even from the chat box, I can read through it while you're talking. And I think the kind of impact that these two characters from your books have made on your readers, it is just so immense. We've read these epics as part of our cultural, upbringing, but it is somehow through your books that these characters stay with us. And I think that's such a huge compliment to your writing, Chitraji, really. The way you've, literally tread that fine line while talking about Sita. She is that the woman that everyone idolizes. She's somebody to worship alongside Lord Ram, but she's also the first feminist probably that we've witnessed in our culture who just refused to come back home because now the man has agreed to bring her home, and she says, I will not come, So I think that
at a certain point, Sita says, no compromise. She is very strong in that. Yes.
So
sorry, I interrupted you.
Not at all. So I was wondering, while talking about these characters, we do realize that they are very radically different from the traditional portrayal that we're used to seeing them in, In retelling the Mahabharata and the Ramayana through the women protagonist lens, you were risking the ire of conservative Hindus. Did that thought ever cross your mind while writing?
Oh my goodness, yes. It crossed my mind. It certainly crossed the minds of all my relatives who knew I was writing this. They're like, why? You're writing, you're writing sister of my heart kind of books. Just keep writing those. Why do you want people to get upset? So, and also beyond my, worry about what more conservative Hindus might say, I wanted to get it right. I didn't want just my ideas in this. I wanted them to be the real Sita, the real Draupadi, and the real, the other women characters who are also very, very important, especially in Forest of Enchantments. I wanted to give a voice to these other characters as well. And so I did a lot of praying and thinking because I was like, God, please help me do a good job with this. Please help me, inspire me so that I write something that is true and hopefully that will last through time, but also that is based on the original text. So I did a huge amount of research. There is almost nothing in those books that are actual facts that are not taken from the original Mahabharats and Ramayans. I also realized something. There are many versions of these epics. We just think there is one version, one Ramayana, one Mahabharata. That is not true. Down the ages, these books have been kind of transformed by each of the writers that have written them. For example, just for Forest of Enchantments, I read Valmiki, I read Tulsidas, I read Kritibas for those who are Bengalis. Kritibas was a big part of my growing up. I read the Kamba Ramayan from the south. I read the Adbhut Ramayan, which talks about the amazing, the interpretation of the Adbhut Ramayan is that Sita is a warrior and she is daughter of Ravan and Mandodari, a very complicated story. I won't go into that, but you can look it up. So, there were all of these, what shall I say? There were all of these elder texts that gave me permission to reinterpret, because I saw that the spirit of our culture was in the reinterpretation of our texts, saying these are alive, these are coming down the ages, and every writer before me that dealt with them felt like they wanted to make them relevant to their times. So I felt that I was following in a great tradition. That said, I mean, could things have gone wrong? Oh my God, yes, things could have gone wrong at every step of the way. I really think God was with me, Mother Sita was with me, and that people responded so positively. Now, so I thought later, why did that happen, especially with Forest of Enchantments? Because, I think the more conservative Hindu forces have become stronger. And I finally thought that perhaps it is because my project is to honor Sita. It is not to belittle anyone else. Honoring Sita does not require me to dishonor Ram. That's not how it works. Sita herself never dishonors Ram. To show the strength of a woman doesn't mean that we have to make a man feel less. It's not like that at all. I think the whole idea is to uplift both genders. And that can be done at the same time. As we look at Sita, we focus on Sita and we see how wonderful Sita is. It doesn't mean that we have to say anyone else is less, right? So to make a woman become stronger in the community, to give her respect, doesn't mean that we're going to respect men less. Why should it be that kind of very, very oversimplified dynamic? It doesn't have to be like that. So I think perhaps that helped people feel more positive towards the book, because the book is about Sita and it's about the women of the epic. It's not about belittling anyone. It's about showing the strength and the complexity of these women.
I think that's also something that, reflects in all your books, that this a particular thought that you just conveyed, that to show a strong woman, you do not need to show somebody else as weak. It is not a thing about, one against the other. And that is why in all your books, I feel that, though your women protagonists are very, very strong, they are also feminine, It's not as if they become the man literally or take on the role of the men per se. They are just very strong women. So for instance, in The Mistress of Spices, it's the protagonist's ability to use everyday spices that lends her these, almost magical powers. Is that something also you do deliberately? You may take something absolutely commonplace and you make it into a really powerful tool of feminism.
Yes, I thought a lot about when I was writing Mistress of Spices. I did think a lot about it, but I have to claim something, or I have to disclaim something, which is that a lot of my ideas come from, some other source, maybe from the subconscious, maybe from some kind of divine inspirational source. So it's not like I always think through these things as I write them, the idea for using spices just came up, And then when I thought about it, I thought about all the things that you're saying. But it wasn't always a conscious decision. I think art comes from a very interesting and perhaps mysterious place. And I do believe that inspiration is divine in some ways, especially if we take a little time and we think about it and we are quiet. It's almost a meditative act to come up with the ideas, and even the writing down of things. It's often a meditative activity. I don't know what words are going to come. I really don't often know. Yes, I'll plan out the books, I will outline chapters and so forth, but often things change because a better idea comes. So I have to say that it's always a combination of some kind of external inspiration, or maybe I should say deep internal inspiration coming up. So I can't take credit for the things in my books. I really cannot. I'm just thankful that they come into the world through me, but they really come from some greater source than me. That said, I thought that once I thought of spices, I did think, yes, this is the kind of thing I want to show how something very ordinary can also be powerful, because it goes along with the larger theme of women's empowerment, that yes, even a very ordinary woman who seems to have, if you just look at her from the outside, she seems to have nothing heroic in her. Deep in her is that core, that possibility of behaving courageously, behaving heroically, behaving, I don't know, selflessly in the best sense of the term, which means that we just don't become doormats for other people, but we give where it is important to give, and we stand up where it's important to stand up.
That's such a wonderful thought, and for the writer within me, or the aspiring writer within me, what you just said, it just holds so much meaning, because a lot of time people tell you, why don't you write? And I feel that just because somebody writes well doesn't mean they have a story inside of them, And I think that what you said, it just flows naturally from within you. I think you're blessed, really, because the way that your stories do flow, they seem to have that divine touch that connects it with the audience. Really wonderful.
Well, thank you. Thank you for saying that. I do, and I feel very, very blessed and humbled that that happens for me. Where does a story idea come from? I don't know. It's very mysterious. Suddenly I will get an idea. And then I'll write them down, because otherwise I'll forget that idea. It'll come to me and it'll go away. So that is true. That said, I do believe that we are all creative at core, because I think we are connected to the divine at our core, and that is a very creative place. So one should explore that within oneself. I encourage all the women here. The writing may not be your thing, but creativity certainly is. So how that creativity might express is, it will be your own mystery and your own discovery. But I do believe, and especially when we are bringing up children, it's very important to kind of encourage that creativity, because I do believe, and we see that in children, don't we? They will draw, they will write, they will sing, they have no self-consciousness until other people say, oh, you're not doing this well, and go into some other field or whatever. But so if we encourage their creativity and also our creativity, I think inside all of that, us is still that creative child. And we just have to encourage that child to come out. And I hope all of you listening today will think about that and bring that creativity into your life, because it is a great joy when we uncover that creativity within us. It is a great joy, quite separate from whatever else is going on outside. We might have many challenges outside in our lives, but when we are able to give space to that creativity, to allow that creativity to blossom, it's a whole other happiness. And I wish that for all of you.
Thank you so much. Chitraji, while we're talking about the process and the art of writing, I wanted to ask you two questions which are pertaining to, this entire process of writing. Uh, so one is that, do you view writing as a tool of empowerment for women? Do you think there should be more women's voices telling their stories? And the second is, uh, as a writer, do you feel that you're having now to compete with the audio visual medium more and more? I mean, there was a time when everybody just picked up a book to read. Now there are so many alternatives. There is the internet and there is the television. And do you find that as an author you have to compete with those mediums?
Okay, so let me answer the second question first, and then we'll go back and you can, just repeat the question for all our audience also. Yes, there's a lot more competition here, and I think studies have proven that the attention span is getting smaller and smaller of people because of these other mediums where something exciting has to happen every minute. And there are all these, visual inputs and musical inputs and whatever. And, things are getting shorter and shorter on these other mediums. So yes, there is a much greater challenge. When Tagore was writing his books, he could write these huge books because, hey, that was pretty much all the entertainment that was there. And there weren't even that many writers. So when his new book came out, everybody who could read Bengali, who was educated, were like, oh, Tagore book has come out. Everyone's like, have you read the new Tagore book? Okay, that doesn't happen for us. They're more like, have you seen the new movie? Have you heard this song? Oh, this song has gone viral on YouTube or whatever. And then there's Instagram. There's just a lot of noise around us. So we have to be aware of that. We have to be aware of that. Fortunately, there's always, I think, a solid core group of people who realize that the joy of reading is not like any other of these other mediums. It's not like anything else. It won't be completely satisfied by these other mediums, because what does reading allow us to do? It allows us to create that world inside of ourselves, right? A movie just gives you that world, you just watch it. But here we are creating that world, we are visualizing, and we are empathizing through creating that character. We are inhabiting that character. That character looks like how we want that character to look like. Right? So it's a very intimate connection. You open the book, you're in that world, and whatever you are feeling, it's just yours to feel. There's nobody else telling you how to interpret that. Yes, later you can discuss or you can read something about it, but that one-on-one, I feel, is always going to be very, very powerful. So I believe that yes, we have a lot of other things competing, but that readers will always love to read because no other experience is like reading. It's just not. Those of us who love reading know that. They know that we relate to a book in a whole other intimate way. It is ours in a whole other intimate way than movies can't do that. I mean, movies do wonderful things. I love movies myself, but they can't, right? A music video can't do the same thing for us, right? So, and I have some faith, I have some belief. And in India particularly, I think there is a huge and wonderful and growing reading public. The last few years when I've been coming to the big book festivals, yes, not just in Jaipur, which is the huge one, literally hundreds of thousands of people coming to these events. But all over India, there are wonderful book festivals, right? So you can see that there's a real hunger for books. There's a real love for books. And that just makes me so happy. I think, as a writer, that restores my faith in the human race. Because as long as we really sit down with a book, as long as we can, because what are we saying in a book and when we read it? We are saying, I have the intelligence and the power to interpret this world for myself. It's a very important act. With other things, the interpretation is already given to us. And in so many areas of our lives, and especially, I think in many countries right now, even the news has become very polarized, right? One, let's say, radio station or newspaper will interpret it in a certain way and give it to us, and another one interpret it in a whole other way and give it to us. And we just have to take it in. But with a book, we are still free to interpret it the way we want. And that is so powerful, right? So I hope that that will always flourish and be strong. So I have great hope that it will. So let's go back to your other question.
So my other question was whether you feel that, writing is the tool of empowerment for women, and do you feel that more women should write just to share the women's voices and give, have a space for those voices?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think writing is a great tool for empowerment. And like I was saying, writing is a wonderful tool because it is powerful, but it doesn't force itself on anyone. The other person has to be willing to read. So there's already like a little alliance between the reader and the writer. And therefore, there's already a sympathy between them. And therefore, yes, absolutely, it is a great way for women to empower their own voices and also to have maybe spaces available, more and more spaces available where women can publish these works. I do recommend to people to look to the internet for that, because yes, publication as a book is wonderful. Publication in a physical magazine is wonderful, but there are so many places on the internet where one can publish and get immediately readers, not just local readers, but readers from all over. And also a lot of these sites are free for people to come and read. So it becomes very easy for people to access as readers. So I recommend that. I recommend blogs. Through blogs, you can get your writing out to many, many people, and it's very fun. It's very creative. It's not very difficult. A lot of blogs are, you can create them for free. So I really recommend that. It's a great thing for your extended family also. I recommend this especially for our viewers who have lived a full life or are living a full life already. The family stories, they are very important. That's something we can pass on to our future generations as women. Otherwise, the children that follow us, especially the girls that follow us, will never know how it was for us. They will never know our struggles, our triumphs, how society is changing. And so I recommend, I hope I can inspire all of you to write your family stories one way or another, for yourself, but also for, as Sita said, those generations that are coming after us. Children, grandchildren. By the time it's great-grandchildren, we may not be around. The only thing they will know of us and our times will be through those stories.
Yes. I'm sure you have inspired so many of us here today to actually, listen to the heart, go back to writing, or get down to writing, maybe to start writing. There are often times I think for myself at least that I want to write and I never seem to have the time to do it. But I'm so inspired today, and I hope it will lead to some good outcome as well. I could go on asking you the questions I have for you, and we'll just totally run out of time. But there are so many questions in the chat box that I must take up now before the audience gets really upset with me.
So, and also, let me just say one thing. If people have really burning questions that were not answered, come to my Facebook page. You will see that I have put up a post. It's a public page. Everyone can come. As long as you have a Facebook account. And I have already put up a note saying that I'll be speaking at FLO Lucknow. And so you can write your questions there also in case we don't have time to answer them. I will do my best to answer them there.
Thank you so much for that already. Let me start with the questions, please. The first question is from Swati Verma from Lucknow. And she asks, when you began your journey, did you feel pressured as an Indian writer to specifically talk about the socio-political inequities and atrocities back here, or as a woman to write women-centric books. The point is, do we have the same creative freedom as the men, or are we straddled with our baggage and the burden of expectations?
Right, right. That's a great question. I think because I started at ground zero, I didn't even think I was a writer. I was just writing things that were of importance to me, that I felt I needed to write. So I didn't feel that much because I was not in a community of writers of any kind in the beginning. I was just writing for myself. So I did not feel that pressure until later, until after I began publishing and the books reached some amount of fame. But yes, pressures will always be there. We just have to decide which pressure we're going to give into, right? Isn't that just like all of our lives? There's always pressures around us. And we have to realize that sometimes, yes, it's a pressure that's important and valid. And sometimes we have to realize that, no, this pressure is completely like, illogical and I will not deal with it. I think ultimately we have, sometimes we don't have a choice, but certainly when we are writing, it is a creative activity and we have that choice. And ultimately I am, as the author, and all of you as authors are going to make the final decisions, and everyone else will just have to accept it. And I think if the writing is good enough, if what we're writing is original and powerful and comes across with a strong voice, people will begin to accept, right? So I feel that one has to write from the passion within us. If I started writing about something just because other people want me to, and believe me, other people are always telling me what to write. Now that, now that they know I'm a writer, etc., they're like, I have this great idea for you. I'm like, okay. And then I have to be very patient and listen to their idea. But you know what? I have the choice after that to put that aside or to take it. So that's the same with all kinds of social pressures and accept, all these social pressures. We can accept them or we cannot. Now, sometimes I know some of us are in situations where we have to really fight against or give into social pressure, but at least our creative activities are not like that. So writing is not like that. I think we have a lot more autonomy with writing. I'll say something very quickly, which I think is related, that long ago I made a decision that I really don't care how much money I make from writing. Fortunately, I have a money-making career. It's my teaching, so I felt if things really came down to the worst and I made no money at all off of my writing, that would be okay. I still have a career. Should something happen to my family, I can take care of them. So that gave me a lot of strength. Having made that decision and having made that decision clear to my publishers, we were all okay with it. And then fortunately, the books became very successful. But I think as an artist, at some point you have to say, my vision is more important than anything else. And paradoxically, when we say that and we believe in our vision, success comes. A lot of times success just comes. We don't have to sell out, we don't have to compromise our ideals to become successful. That's a false dichotomy, I think.
Thank you so much for your answer. There's another question. There were actually a lot of questions about Draupadi and women characters from our mythological texts that you might ever have thought about writing books on, other than Sita and Draupadi. But there's one question, similar to something that we did ask, but specifically this one is specifically for Draupadi. Did you have to cut down your imagination while portraying the character of Draupadi in your book, perhaps for fear of how the society would react? This question comes from Kavita Nigam.
Okay, great question. No, when it was for all of my books, I I don't do that because, first of all, I have to think, how do I want to portray the character, right? So I have to have an idea in my head, a vision in my head. But once that vision is clear, I will trust that vision and I will go with it. So this is something I say to my writing students, and it may be of help to some of you, which is that once we start writing, we have to forget about everyone else. We have to forget about how is society going to respond to this? How is my mother going to respond to this? How's my mother-in-law going to respond? I had to actually do that. I had to actually kind of push those thoughts out of my mind, because otherwise it will just paralyze us as writers. Then we cannot be true to our own vision, right? So I think at least when we are writing, we have to put those thoughts out. Maybe later when we are revising, we have to say, have I done a good job? Have I done a good enough job that people will be drawn into my vision and they will understand this character from the inside out, not from the outside in when we judge people, but from the inside out. If when we create a character who's alive enough, people will begin to not even judge, they will begin to identify from the inside out. And that is the sign of success. So I have to always push aside all these other quote unquote critical voices that want to tell me what to do in order to write. And sometimes those voices are just in my head. I have to push them out of my head. It's not even like other people are telling me. You know, we as women often put boundaries around ourselves. Isn't that true? We are the ones who say, oh, we can't do that. What if I do that? What if someone says this? What if someone says that? What if I have this problem? But if we believe strongly in what we are doing, we have a reason for doing it. You know, we need to go ahead and do it and see what happens, right? Within reason, within, you know, there are some situations which are clearly dangerous, but within reason, we have to believe that people will accept to whatever, at least minimal level of safety, people will accept.
Absolutely. Thank you. Kavita says thanks. And yes, we are the ones who put boundaries around ourselves. Yes. We could go on with the questions. A couple of questions more. Do you like the film adaptation of your novels? Rupal asks this question.
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, first of all, whenever someone wants to make a film of our books or my books, I'm always very thankful, I'm very appreciative, because now it will have a whole other life and a whole other kind of life and audience, and that's wonderful. And I learned very early, because one of my more experienced writer friends told me this. She sat me down and she said, look, your book is going to be made into a movie, and you better come to terms with something. It's a movie. It's not your book. It's going to be the director's vision. It's not going to be your vision. Don't expect that. So if you drop that expectation, you'll be happy with the experience. Otherwise, if you sit in the movie theater comparing, oh, she shouldn't look like this. I didn't make her say that. You're just going to be unhappy. So based on that, I am always thankful. I'm very thankful for people who have made movies out of my books. They have brought it to a whole other audience. Some of the movies have gone on to win several awards, and I'm very thankful for that. I would love to share some good news with you guys. Palace of Illusions has been optioned, and of course now, so I'm very excited about that. Right now things are, you know, because of COVID, everything is stopped, but yes, so please send good energy. And I also want to tell you about my latest book before we end today. And Forest of Enchantments is being looked at by directors and movie houses. So, hey, if you have any clout out there, do send Forest of Enchantments to people who might want to make movies, because wouldn't that be great to see Sita also on the big screen, or, you know, whatever kind of screen comes up. It would be great to see that extension of the book. But my latest book It's titled The Last Queen. I've just finished it. It's just gone to my publisher, HarperCollins, but it has already been optioned for a movie. So I'm very excited. It's a historical novel. I'm not allowed to tell you who the character is. There will be an unveiling of the character at some point by the publisher and movie house, but it is a historical character. She is a queen out of Indian history who fought against the British very courageously. So if you have any guesses, you can put them on my Facebook page and I'll see if somebody guessed it right. She is not very well known, which is why I wanted to tell her story. But that's The Last Queen and it's been optioned.
You have got us very excited, Chitraji, really excited, because wanted to ask you what's coming up next, but there was such a barrage of other questions that I thought we can, definitely talk about this later. But I'm so glad that you shared this news with all of us on this platform. And since everyone here seems to be an ardent fan of your writing, we look forward to this. And I think, Pooja, I should wind this up now. Yes?
If that's all right with Toby.
We can stay on for a few more minutes. Yes, we can stay on if you want, or we can wind it up. It's up to you. I leave that choice.
We take a couple of more questions. I think people are still listening, avidly to you. And I would like to take up a couple of more questions if Pooja is okay with that.
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. So there is one question from an aspiring writer who says, what's the order of importance for an author? The story or the character arc and handling, or the actual text and prose itself?
Great question. For me, for each writer, you have to understand this is different. I'm a very character-centric writer. The character always comes first. The character has to inspire me. I have to imagine the character. I have to mentally visualize the character. I have to think of somewhat of a character arc. With Palace of Illusions and Forest of Enchantments, that arc was already provided for me. I didn't have to think about it. But for others, I have to kind of think of it, but also leave things open for characters to grow and surprise us. But for me, it's always the character first. Now, for some other people, it is the plot. I have friends who are writers who are much more plot driven. They will plot out the entire book before they start it. So it's not like one is correct and one is wrong. You have to just understand what kind of writer you are, what works for you. They're both good ways of approaching a novel or a story.
Great. Another question that we have, again pertaining to the Ramayana and Mahabharata, and this is from Nidhi Prakash, who asks, should they be referred to as historical tales and not just mythological stories? Do you agree with that?
Well, the Indian term for it is itihas, right? So itihas is a history. So in India, that is what we traditionally think of these stories. They go into the ancient times. Therefore, those times seem mythological for us. They deal with history, with that world for them is one of the supernatural mixed with the natural. So magical things happen in that world. But in some ways, we are straddling. We're right in between history and mythology in itihas, right? So it's an interesting space to find ourselves in. And I love that it blends the natural world and what might have been going on in the history of a country with the supernatural world, which really is all around us. I think it's as much around us now as it was in the time of the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, but we've kind of lost the ability to connect with it. However, if you all think back on your lives, have there been things that defy explanation? There certainly have been in my life. So I think that other layer of life is right around us. We've just forgotten how to look at it.
Well, I think I have to wind up the questions. Like I said, I could go on, but we will run out of time. And thank you so much for answering so many questions that I had within me. And they were not just questions that I wanted to put up to you because I was given this task, but because I genuinely wanted to ask you this. And as Pooja had shared at the beginning, that when we were discussing the plans for her year before she took over as the chairperson of the FLO Lucknow chapter, we had put your name on the list and we were so excited that how will we get her to Lucknow, from the US? And I'm so glad that you're here today, albeit virtually, and that I am moderating the session. Thank you so much. I would now...
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. I am very happy to be here. And this is an example of how even when terrible things happen, good things come out of them, right? So yes, we are all suffering from the coronavirus, but some good things have come, and there are always blessings kind of folded into these challenges that come to us. So again, thank you so much. I am very delighted to be here.
Thank you. I would like Pooja to please give the concluding remarks for the session.
Thank you, Devanshi. So I think I have a question of my own. So, Chitraji, if you could write a book on any living woman, who would that be? Is there someone who inspires you to tell their story?
Someone who's living right now,
Yeah.
or someone who lived just a little while back?
All right, I give you that liberty.
Okay, the woman I really want to write this story about, and I don't know if I will ever be able to because it will require a lot of research, is Gandhiji's wife. I want to write that story very much because, some years back I went to Ahmedabad and I went to the Gandhi Museum over there. And as I was walking through the museum, I came across her photo and her story, and it was like I heard a voice. It was like she was saying to me, write my story, write my story. Everyone knows about my husband, but nobody knows what it was like to live with that kind of person. So I am very, I think about that from time to time. I'm very interested in that project.
I think that's a brilliant choice of person, and I mean, just the thought of it is something which I would look forward to in the future, and I would really, really want you to write that story. That's for sure.
Thank you.
That's for sure. I'm,
Thank you.
I'm so at loss of words here, only to be expected when you're listening to a wordsmith like Chitraji. So I just want to say that today, after listening to you, my love for your books has been redoubled. But what really charmed me was your clarity of thought and your disarming presence. Thank you so
Thank you.
much for gracing our chapter. And
Thank you so much.
I
And
understand.
thank you. Thank you. I'm so glad that there is flow because, flow is so important. It's such an important part of the overall organization. It gives women a voice, a role, strength, inspiration. So I am very, very happy to see that. And I admire all of you for what you are doing and for the differences you are making in your community, in the larger society, in India. I think that is how we empower women, one woman at a time. If we can each inspire one woman, all of us listening today, if we can inspire one woman or one girl, what a difference that would make. If we can support them in whatever way is possible for us, what a difference that would make.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Now, I would like to call upon our Senior Vice Chair, Mrs. Arushi Tandon, to please give formal vote of thanks.
Thank you, Pooja. Good evening, everyone. It was a pleasure to listen to Ms. Chitra. I'm truly spellbound. Every generation of women did and continue to have its own set of challenges she observes. And what is important is to listen to each other's story in order to be more compassionate. The always delightful and charming Chitra Divakaruni spins saga that is powerful, song-like, and magical in portraying the lives of women in India and as immigrant brides in America. Chitra is one of the most exceptional writers of Indian movement. She had developed the immigrant sensibility as the major theme in her fiction. Chitra explores, understands, and portrays emotion in a breathtaking, fascinating book. Thank you, Ms. Chitra, for sharing your personal experience and story with us. Thank you, Ms. Pooja Garg, our chapter chairperson, for organizing this successful webinar. Your webinar has been a great success in all possible respects. I hope you continue with this. Wish you all the best with that. Thank you, Anshi Seth, Chair for the day. It was lively, engaging, and fulfilling because of your presence. Heartfelt gratitude to our sponsors, Liberty Shoes Private Limited, RG Infra City Private Limited, Shalimar Cough, Wild Punch, and now Lucknow. I would also like to thank our event registration, print, and social media team. A special thanks to our governing body, FLO members from Lucknow and other chapters, and guests for being here with us and gracing this event. Thank you.
Thank you to everyone. Thank you so much. And